Hey there, welcome back to Grounded Ramblings BlogCast. I'm Crish, an army veteran, retired police detective, lifelong martial artist, and essentially a simple bloke in his 50s still trying to make sense of combat sports without the drama. This is the brand new dark side of the mat, where I explore the psychology of power, loyalty, silence, and institutional culture in martial arts and combat sports, not just to raise awareness, but to challenge harmful norms and push for meaningful change, because we can do better. Today we're diving into episode 1, BJJ Cults Exposed, TheGentle Art of Obedience in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. By the end of this episode, I want you to think a little differently about not just what happens on the mats, but what gets protected around them. The real question is never just what happened. The real question is what kind of culture made it possible. Like, subscribe and share to support my work. Now let's dive straight into it. Chapter 1. Why do smart adults obey weird gym rules? The BJJ culture explained. I'm not talking about obviously dangerous rules, not rules about hygiene or safety. I mean the strange ones, the ones that make grown men and women act like school children in a room full of killers. The rule about how to bow, the rule about where to stand, the rule about which patch you wear, the rule about whether you can train somewhere else, the rule about who you are allowed to learn from. In some places, these rituals are sold as tradition, discipline, and respect, and sometimes they are exactly that. But in a high-control environment, rules stop serving learning and start serving power. That is the line I want to explore in this episode, because a healthy gym asks a lot from you: effort, humility, consistency, composure under pressure. But an unhealthy gym asks for something else. It asks for surrender. It asks you not just to train there, but to belong there in a way that makes doubt feel disloyal. And once belonging gets tied to obedience, people start doing things they would mock anywhere else. So this episode is not about saying every BJJ academy is a cult. It is about asking a much more uncomfortable question. How does a combat gym become a belief system? Chapter 2, Founder Worship in BJJ. Who really holds power in the academy? Every culture has characters, and the martial arts world has some very familiar ones. There is the founder, the man whose story becomes larger than life. There is the head coach, the local interpreter of doctrine. There are the enforcers, usually loyal senior students who police behavior without ever needing to be officially appointed. There are the ambitious students who learn quickly that skill matters, but approval matters too. And then there are the beginners, the people who came in looking for confidence, fitness, self-defense, friendship, maybe a second chance at life. Those are often the people most vulnerable to a strong identity-driven culture. Writers and commentators inside the grappling world have already tried to name this pattern. Stephen Kesting discussed cult behavior in terms of manipulative tactics that benefit leaders or those higher in the chain. Craig Jones, in his own sarcastic style, described recognizable features such as visual compliance, market isolation, inner circles, and validation through belts and promotions. Different tone, same warning. Once authority stops being, technical and starts becoming moral, the room changes. Chapter 3. From Kung Fu movies to BJJ myths, how martial arts teach obedience. I remember falling in love with Kung Fu movies. The plots were nearly always the same. Some frail kid gets bullied, goes looking for a school, pledges allegiance, survives a brutal training regime, calls his instructor master, obeys every word, and comes out the other side invincible. Then there was the rest of it. My secret kung fu is better than yours. Rival schools at war. Extreme loyalty. Punishment for sharing secret training, and the idea that joining another school was a betrayal. The master was not just a teacher, he was the ultimate source of knowledge, sometimes the only source of knowledge. I've lived around versions of that culture myself, and I hated it. Because somewhere along the way, discipline stops being about learning and starts being about control. And that is important because many of us were primed for this long before we ever entered a dojo or academy. Martial arts mythology has always romanticized lineage, secret knowledge, rival schools, suffering as purification, and the idea that loyalty is virtue. In the real world, combat gyms do create genuine connection through trust, hierarchy, repetition, and shared hardship, and that can feel deeply meaningful. But the same ingredients that build healthy community can also be used to narrow thought, isolate students, and make the coach or founder feel like the only legitimate source of truth. Chapter 4. When a BJJ gym stops feeling like a school and starts feeling like a belief system. For this episode, the incident is not one crime, one arrest, or one headline. The incident is cultural. It is the moment a school stops feeling like a place of learning and starts feeling like a closed world. You know the signs. Cross-training is treated like cheating. Questions are treated like disrespect. A belt becomes more than rank. It becomes social currency. The founder's image is everywhere. Stories become doctrine. Rituals become tests of loyalty. People stop saying, "That seems odd," and start saying, "That's just how we do things here." It happens gradually, which is why it is so easy to miscall. And this is what makes high-control environments dangerous. They rarely announce themselves with madness. They present themselves as standards, as tradition, as excellence, as family. But once the culture teaches you that obedience is maturity, dissent starts to look like immaturity. That is the shift. Not from freedom to prison, but from learning to conformity. Chapter 5. Respect or control. How BJJ academies defend strict rules and loyalty. When these cultures are criticized, the first response is usually not aggression, it is justification. You hear the same language again and again. Respect, standards, safety, hygiene, discipline, identity, team values. And to be fair, those words matter. Any good academy needs structure, any combat gym needs boundaries. But structure becomes suspicious when it is selectively enforced, when it mainly protects status, or when it is used to shut down independent judgment. That is why the public debate over rigid academy etiquette matters. In the Gracie Barra rules controversy covered by BJJEE, the Academy response defended etiquette as part of a safe and positive training environment. That is a serious argument and it deserves to be heard. But the backlash happened because many practitioners looked at those rules and saw something else. Not discipline in service of learning, but discipline in service of image, hierarchy, and compliance. The first institutional response in these situations is almost always the same. You are misunderstanding our culture. Sometimes that is true. Sometimes it is also how culture protects itself from scrutiny. Chapter 6. Belt rank, ritual and power, the hidden social currency of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. In this episode, I am not alleging that every strict academy is abusive or that ritual by itself proves corruption. What is proven in the public material is narrower. Some academy rules existed. Those rules were defended publicly, and they sparked mockery and criticism from many practitioners who felt the culture looked excessive or infantilizing. What is being examined here is the wider allegation that when rigid etiquette combines with rank pressure, founder worship, cross-training taboo, and social dependence, the result can become coercive rather than educational. This distinction matters. Not every unhealthy culture is criminal. Not every controlling environment breaks the law, but harmful systems often begin long before anything reaches that threshold. They begin by teaching people who is above question. They begin by deciding which discomfort counts as growth and which silence counts as loyalty. That is why culture matters so much. It is the precondition, the rehearsal space, the place where future denial learns its lines. Chapter 7: Cross-Training, Taboo, and Gym Loyalty, Why BJJ Students Fear Breaking the Rules. One of the most revealing things about martial arts culture is this. Often, the first honest response is laughter. People laugh when grown adults need permission for things that should not require permission. They laugh at the uniforms, the ritualized posture, the obsession with lineage, the reverence around founders, the performative seriousness. In the Gracie Barra etiquette debate, practitioners openly mocked rules. They felt treated adults like children. Craig Jones pushed the same critique through satire, describing cult-like features in BJJ such as visual conformity, founder reverence, and isolation from other gyms. Mockery matters because it marks the point where public language starts catching up with private discomfort. A lot of people inside rigid gyms know something feels off long before they say it. Humor becomes the first safe form of dissent. It lets people admit what they were afraid to say directly. This is not just tradition. Some of this is theater. Some of it is branding. Some of it is control. But public backlash has limits. It can expose absurdity, but it does not always fix the system. Sometimes ridicule only makes true believers dig in deeper. Chapter 8: Why Students Stay Silent in Toxic Martial Arts Cultures. The real story is not the weird rule. It is the system that makes the weird rule untouchable. Sport Integrity Australia warns that unhealthy coach-athlete relationships can involve blurred boundaries, over-dependence, manipulation, and power imbalances that make it difficult for athletes to recognize or challenge harmful behavior. In combat sports, that risk is magnified because the coach controls more than training. They may control access, opportunity, reputation, social belonging, and even a student's sense of identity. That is why people stay silent. Not because they are weak, not because they cannot think. They stay silent because speaking up can mean losing your gym, your friends, your progress, your coach's approval, and sometimes your whole place in the tribe. Survivors and witnesses in combat sports settings also fear backlash, disbelief, retaliation, and the suspicion that they will be blamed for damaging the team or the brand. So the deeper system failure is this: a culture where loyalty outranks truth will eventually protect the wrong people. Silence becomes the membership fee, and by the time the room realizes what it has normalized, the damage is already old. Chapter 9: How cult-like BJJ gym culture sets the stage for scandals. The frustrating answer is not enough, but something. What has changed most clearly is the conversation. More practitioners now openly question founder worship, cross-training bans, excessive rule culture, and the idea that respect must always flow upward and never be earned downward. More people are also using the language of safeguarding unhealthy coach-athlete dynamics and coercive control to describe patterns that used to be waved away as just the martial arts way. That matters because naming the pattern is the first break in the spell. Once students understand that high control groups often operate through belonging, dependency, identity, and fear of the outside, the culture becomes easier to analyze and harder to romanticize. Once people understand that abuse in sport is often systemic rather than just the work of one bad individual, they stop asking only who did it and start asking what made this possible. That second question is the one institutions hate most, because once you ask it honestly, you are no longer talking about a person. You are talking about the machine. Chapter 10, Gracie Barra and the Bigger. Question: when does team culture become control? So here is the point of episode 1. A lot of us came into martial arts looking for the good stuff: discipline, courage, humility, competence, truth under pressure. And many gyms really do offer that. They save people, they build people, they give structure to lives that need it. But family can become control when belonging is used to silence doubt. Respect can become obedience when rank is treated like moral authority. Tradition can become camouflage when no one is allowed to ask who benefits. That is why scandals in martial arts rarely come out of nowhere. They are usually preceded by a culture that already taught people to stay quiet, protect the founder, distrust outsiders, and mistake compliance for character. The scandal is often just the first moment the outside world notices what insiders had learned to tolerate. And that takes us to the next episode, because if this chapter was about the blueprint, loyalty, image, ritual, silence, founder, mythology, then the next one is about one of the most visible case studies in the modern grappling world. Next, we move from the general pattern to the brand that made the argument unavoidable: Gracie Barra.